Welcome to the Unique Mums podcast. My name's Anna, and I'm a wife, mum, author, blogger, and Jesus follower, bringing you biblical truth, devotions, and encouragement so you can find joy, purpose, and hope as you navigate through motherhood, one cold cup of coffee at a time. You can find the episode show notes, free devotions, and a lot more information at uniquemums.co.uk. Hello, Mum. Welcome back to the Unique Mums podcast. My name's Anna. I'm your host here on the show. And at the moment, we're doing a series called Walking with Jesus. And today I have a really good conversation to share with you about the practice of silence and solitude. So, this is a really good conversation. And the person that I'm talking to on this podcast episode is Kelly Needham, and she's an American author and a mom, and more importantly, a Jesus follower. And we have a really, really lovely conversation, which I want to share with you. And we go into some details about what solitude actually is, so a definition of what that means, about Kelly's journey in adopting this practice of solitude. And then we also talk about some of the obstacles that keep us from engaging with God on our own, some tips to give mums for developing the practice of solitude, and how we can teach our children to develop the practice of solitude as well. So it's a really lovely conversation, and I hope you stick by. So I'm going to jump right into the conversation. So, Kelly Needham is the author of Purposeful: Why Chasing Your Dreams, Finding Your Calling, and Reaching for Greatness Will Never Be Enough, and Friendish: Reclaiming Real Friendship in a Culture of Confusion, and co host of the Clearly podcast alongside her husband, Jimmy. Hello, Kelly. Welcome to the Unique Mums podcast. It's so good to have you on here today.
Hi, Anna. I'm so happy to be with you today. It's wonderful to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. So could you introduce yourself to our listeners? Who are you? What do you do?
Sure. Well, my name's Kelly. I'm from Texas, born and raised, been here my whole life. Came to know Jesus when I was in junior high, that very awkward and challenging phase of life. Jesus captured my heart. And since then, I've wanted to do nothing but follow him, which has had all sorts of twists and turns. And along the way, as a 20-year-old, I met a man we decided to get married while we were still in school. So we got married at 20 and spent about a decade touring on the road. He was offered a job, a career in music ministry. And so we did that. And that was 18 years ago about now. And since then, our family has grown. We have 5 kids, ranging from ages 13 down to 1, with two adopted boys from India in the middle there. And so life is very full and exciting and has had a lot of highs and a lot of lows thus far in my life.
Yeah. I suppose that's how it is, isn't it? When we live, when we're married, when we have kids, it's life, ups and
It's
downs.
life. Yes.
But it's so good to hear about that. And so you write about several things in your books and blogs. So biblical friendship, meaning and purpose, marriage, knowing God. And one topic that you write about on your website, and that caught my eye, is solitude. So
Mhm.
how do you define solitude, and why is this something you've written about?
Yeah. Well, solitude is, how it sounds. It's an expression of being alone um, solitude comes from kind of that idea of singular or alone.
Mm,
A taking a moment to spend time alone. And of course, for the Christian, it's actually not spending time just by yourself. That solitude, that aloneness is meant to foster communion with God. That in the same way that we might take time to go on a date with our spouse, we're trying to create space for the two of us to be alone, to have conversation, to foster better communication or intimacy. And so, solitude as a Christian expression is a way of getting alone from all the other people in your life, which we can talk about what that means with little kids because it's different, but getting alone to connect with God and to wait on Him. As the psalmist says in Psalm 62, my soul waits on God alone or in silence alone. And that I've written about it because it's been a very formative practice for me in my relationship with God. It's become a place of solace and strength, and sometimes wrestling. And it's not always easy, but it's a way that I'm fostering deeper intimacy with God, which is breathing life into every other facet of my life. And that's why it's been important for me to want to write about and kind of pass that on to others.
Yeah, yeah. So many things that you touched on are things that I've actually kind of been writing a bit about this as well. But I think sometimes people feel like solitude is more for introverts because we like to be on our own, and I'm an introvert. But I think actually it's a struggle for all of us because it's not with an introvert, usually we would turn more to ourselves
Hmm.
and extroverts to people, but this is actually a turning to God. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think for all of us there can be some challenges in that. But as you said, it's really formative. It's something that really brings life, and it's like for me, I feel like that it's like a kind of a basic practice that actually helps us with all the other kind of spiritual practices, like spending this alone time with God will then help us when we're in community with others. And when did God begin speaking to you about the importance of solitude in your journey as a Jesus follower?
Hmm. Um, that's interesting to think about and trace back, but honestly, it's been a part of my walk with Jesus probably since the early days. And I think that was in some ways cultivated due to my circumstances. I began walking with Jesus, like I said, as a very young person. I was in probably sixth grade, seventh grade, and most of my peers, even ones I went to church with, were not that interested in going very deep. We knew maybe Sunday school answers, but I had read a few parts of my Bible that just came to life for me in ways that just shocked me and made me hungry for more. And I found very few other people who shared that same passion at that time.
Mm,
And so that ended up kind of creating a space where I was communing with God alone a lot because there weren't other people around who seemed to have the same interest at that time. Even within my family, we did go to church, but my experience at that age was that we were just kind of nominal church attenders. We went to church and came home and didn't really talk about Jesus at home. And so I found that a lot of my depth was being cultivated in those early years of walking with him
mm,
alone, just me and him. And what I realized along the way is the familiarity I had with time alone with God, like even the practice of it, became a source of strength, especially in seasons of trial, because I now was able to go back to that space of being alone with God and bring my real honest thoughts because I had been practiced in doing that. Whereas I realized some of my peers at that time, as I was entering into adulthood, really didn't have, they weren't very practiced in that. And
mm,
I found myself sharing with others and encouraging them to spend time alone with God. And they'd be like, I don't know what you mean by that.
mm,
And that's where I realized, wow, people need coaching on this. What am I doing that's, been a blessing, or what have I read that others have done?
mm,
And I'm going to try to write about that or encourage others
mm,
to cultivate that space and time with God alone because
mm,
it has been a source of strength for me in good seasons and in hard ones.
mm. And yeah, I guess I grew up actually in a Christian household where we had this concept of quiet time, which I did have, which was basically reading scripture and spending some time in prayer. But I would say that maybe in the last year and a half or so, I've really maybe been a bit more intentional in this area of this time of solitude, really
Mm.
being this thing of I don't know, if maybe more transparency with God and more of an intentional time where it's not just like checking off a task,
Mhm.
which isn't because he's a person and he's my father, he loves me. And it's more of
Mhm.
like a meeting. And yes, an encounter with him. Yeah, and it's, I think, getting past that thing that sometimes we feel, which is like, this is something I need to do as a Christian rather than this is something I get to do. I get to spend time with my father.
That's
And
right.
yeah, it's, yeah. So what would you say are the main obstacles that keep us from engaging with God on our own?
Mm. I think one of the biggest obstacles is the fact that we're engaging with someone that we cannot see or hear with
Hmm.
our senses. And that is a huge obstacle. It's what creates for people that feeling of, what am I doing again? It's when you start to ask yourself, do I really believe God is real as you sit alone in a room and talk to him and you go,
Yeah.
am I crazy right now? What's really happening?
Mm,
Um, it's really challenging because God is a person. And so the same principles, relational principles we apply to every other area of our life do apply to God. A relationship is cultivated by time spent together consistently. And when there's give and take. It has to be two ways. You have to talk and listen for there to be relationship. And so all those things apply to cultivating depth of intimacy with God. We need to spend time alone with him consistently, and we need to both share our heart honestly and listen to his heart honestly. But it's when we get alone that we start to feel faith has to kick in. Do I really believe that the Bible is speaking truth when it says that God is with me, though I can't see or hear him, that I interact with him by faith, not by sight? Do I really believe that there is a creator who is alive, who I can hear from, though it will be different than the humans around me?
mm,
So I have to engage my faith immediately in that space. And that sometimes feels uncomfortable to us, but it's just part of what life is, part of what knowing God is this side of heaven. I
mm,
think the other thing that's a obstacle is once we get alone, we're so used to noise as moms, just as 21st century people, that when we do finally get to a place where we've stopped our body from moving, we've gotten away from other people, and we're not currently doing something else, our mind usually assaults us with thoughts,
mm,
tasks. Oh, there's all these things I haven't done. Oh, I'm going to forget about that. Feelings and emotions, maybe something that happened to us earlier in the day that we haven't had a second to really think about. But now that we're going, gosh, I feel really embarrassed by that moment. And I can't think straight because my emotions are now assaulting me. And all these things kind of come up. And it's what makes us not want to get alone with God because it's uncomfortable. Um, and for me, I have to have, I think one of the regular practices of solitude is that transitional moment when you first sit down with God. You really do have to first let all those thoughts come and kind of give them to him. Write them down. I write down to-do lists all the time in my time alone with God because I keep having thoughts. Oh, don't forget to pick up the laundry, and don't forget to throw the potatoes in the oven, at this time. So I just write it down really quick on a list so I can just get it out of my brain to
mm,
focus on God. I'm writing lists, and then sometimes if I have big emotional responses in that alone time, I just start there with God.
mm, yeah,
God, I wanted to talk to you about something else today, but right now I'm just feeling anxious. And
mm,
I'm feeling anxious because I got this news earlier today and I'm really worried about it and I don't know what to do. And I just start talking to him about that and give it to him.
mm,
But those are just obstacles that exist in every single moment of engaging with him. And the challenge we have before us is, will we endure those things? Will we say, God, in our actions, will we say, God, you're worth it. You're worth it to me to experience this moment of discomfort, set these things aside, and in your presence to then have space in my mind and heart to hear from you, to engage with you, to cultivate fellowship with you, because that's what Jesus died to give us, is a relationship with God. So what else matters?
mm,
So
yeah.
yeah, those are a few obstacles I face all the
Mm.
time.
So good, yeah. And I think many mums can relate to that. At least I know I can with the tasks and the thoughts
Mhm.
that come. It's very similar with me when I'm alone with God, or a certain emotion or anxiety comes up. And yeah, sometimes it's at least sometimes I read books that suggest like an order, like pray for a while and then read scripture and then pray again. But I think, at least with me, it doesn't work to always have exactly the same order because
Mhm.
I really feel it's like the Holy Spirit is working and kind of setting the right what needs to be dealt with basically. So if I have an
Mhm.
anxiety or something, that's going to come up almost straight away, and that's a good thing because he's working in my heart. So um
Mhm.
yeah, so I suppose it's letting go of that idea that it's going to be like this time where suddenly we're going to feel at peace straight away. That will happen, but sometimes it takes a while to get to that stage.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so sometimes you
Mhm.
have to just process emotions and sometimes things from the past, even in some cases, or just to-do lists and tiredness and whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And what tips then would you give mums for developing the practice of solitude?
Mm. Well, it most likely won't happen if you don't plan on it or schedule it
Mm,
or think through when and where you're going to do that. Because part of life as a mom is I'm on call. My children need me, uh, at various moments all the time in ways, that I can't predict. And so if I'm just waiting for a quiet moment to do this, that may not happen. So I usually in each season, every like 3 months or so, I'm looking at my calendar, my life are my kids in school right now? Is it summer? What's going on? And when would be the best time of day for me to have some fellowship with God, to spend time in solitude alone with Him. And I will change that based on every season. Sometimes it's early in the morning before they wake up. Sometimes it's the newborn season. I can't wake up that early. So I'm going to wait for that first morning nap, and that's going to be my time. Or maybe it's at night or the lunch hour. I don't know, but I'll pick that time and then I'll pick where I'm going to meet with God. Is it going to be at my kitchen table, in
mm,
my bedroom, at my desk? In the living room on the floor while the baby plays next to me. What is the place?
mm,
And I'll pick that time and place per season. And then I will try to, if it's possible, give myself a backup time. If I say I pick early in the morning, like right now, my time that's set is before my children wake up in the morning for school to get ready. And so if I have a late night and I oversleep or I just can't get up that early, I need to know what my backup time is. And that usually for me is lunchtime or the first afternoon nap, which feels so much more costly, because that's when you can really get stuff done. And it feels hard to put my solitude time there, but if I really live what I believe, that my first priority is my relationship with God, then I need to do that. So that for me is very practically the real thing that I have to fight for is that time and place.
mm,
And the other suggestion I would give is to if you have never practiced solitude, then start with 10 minutes or start with 15 minutes. It doesn't need to be an hour long time, but I would start with a small period of time you feel like you can actually insert into your day and make sure that that time has some kind of two-way street going on. Make sure you're sharing your heart honestly with God, but that you're also listening to God. You're either reading His Word, taking that in,
mm,
or you're just finding ways to quiet your heart. Sometimes I'll just set a timer on my phone for 5 minutes and just to tell myself for these next 5 minutes, I'm not going to read anything in the Word. I'm just going to be quiet and I'm going to stare out the window or I'm going to lay on the floor in my living room and stare at the ceiling
mm,
and just breathe and just give space for the Spirit of God that dwells inside my heart
mm,
to bring things to mind or to deal with me. Or maybe there's just something God will, um, bring up to my mind or my heart that I need to pray about. And so having that timer helps it feel not like this,
mm,
how long do I pray for? It just feels overwhelming. So that little 5-minute timer for me helps
mm,
make sure that my time is two ways. I'm sharing my heart, but
mhm,
I'm also listening.
mm,
And don't get, last thing I would say is don't get discouraged with interrupting children.
mm,
Um, we do need time alone with God, but a lot of times, especially when our kids are very young, that time alone with God has to have a sidekick of our little children. And there's a way to teach them. And I would tell my kids if they were old enough to understand, hey, mommy's talking to Jesus right now. Kind of like we do if we're having a conversation with a friend. We might hold our finger up or say, just hold on 1 second. I'm
mm,
kind of doing that with my kids, going, hold on 1 second. I'm having a conversation with a real person. Can't
mm,
see him, but you still should honor the conversation I'm having the same way you would if I had somebody over sitting on the couch with me. And so will you just wait? Will you just play with this toy and let me finish my conversation with him? And even that is educating our children in the reality of God's existence and his presence in our lives.
Mm, yeah, that's so good. And I really loved all of those tips that you gave. And starting small, I think, is really good as well for someone. Sometimes we can get a bit like over ambitious about these things. So let's start with 1 hour straight away. But maybe to start off 10 minutes or 15, especially if you have young children. Um,
Mhm.
and as you said, having them there with you probably as well at times.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a reality for all of us, I think. Like when my children were very little, it would be when I was feeding them or whatever.
Mhm. Yes.
Um, but yes, I think just having, like you said, I really like what you said about you have the allocated time, but then you have like a backup plan as well in case something happens and that one doesn't work out. You have another kind of time slot that might work out to do it as well. So that's really good. I
Yeah.
really like that. Yeah. And
Mhm.
how can we teach our children to develop this practice of solitude as they grow up?
Mhm. Well, I think modeling it, like we just talked about, is really one key way. If we tell our kids to spend time alone with Jesus, but they never see us do it,
Mm,
that's not very helpful to them.
mm,
And because they don't know how. It's a challenging thing to learn how to have communion with the invisible God who is real, but that's challenging. And so allowing my kids to know about my time with God, to see it occasionally, even if now that my kids are a little older, I say things to them like, hey, I'm going to go spend a little time with Jesus in my room. I'll be back in, 20 minutes. And sometimes they come and interrupt me and I'll tell them, hey, I'm praying right now, but is it urgent? Do you need that? Okay. I'm just not, sometimes I think we feel the pressure to keep this very secret or separate from our
mm,
kids.
mm,
And I don't know why, but I think it's just good for our kids to be very aware of the fact that mommy is trying to cultivate a relationship with this person named Jesus who I can't see,
mm,
but it's a real thing in her life. I hear her talk about it. I see her on her knees talking out loud to a person I can't see, or I see her writing letters to him in a journal that she talks about. So I think modeling it really is the first place to start, teaching our kids to respect our time with him, but not necessarily keeping it a secret
mm,
from them.
mm,
And then it will feel really natural for us to encourage them to cultivate those practices in their own lives. That now that my kids are older, they have a habit of when they get up before they go to school, we try to build in that back and forth relationship.
mm,
Read it. We have them read a little bit of their Bibles and make sure they tell God something that's on their heart for their day of school. What are they worried about, anxious about? Talk to them about it. And for them, that's only 5 to 10 minutes, but there's kind of this built in like, okay, you woke up, like connect with Jesus today, hear
mm,
from him and share your heart with him. And sometimes we do those things together, but we're trying to find ways to help them build that in. And then also give them the freedom to make it their own.
mm,
Just like in friendships, we may, have all of us, there may be 3 or 4 of us that have the same friend, a mutual friend, but each individual's relationship with that person will be a little bit different because we're two unique personalities interacting with each other. And Jesus is the same, and the ways we relate to him are generally the same, but we're all very different people. So the way I relate to Jesus is different than my husband. I meet with him at different times, and there's different things that are special to me in my relationship with him than my husband. And so trying to give our kids the basics and then the freedom to go,
mm,
when would you like to talk to Jesus? It doesn't have to be early in the morning. Maybe that's something you can do at school during the lunch hour, or maybe when you get home from school, you can go to your room and journal. Maybe you like journaling. Maybe you like sitting outside and noticing creation, the things in creation he's made and thanking him for it. And letting our kids kind of explore these various ways to connect with God while also keeping in mind to build a friendship with God, you have to talk to him and you have to listen to him. Those two elements have to be there.
mm.
And that's going to require your honest prayers and your reading of his word and quieting your heart. And so those need to be there. But there's a lot of different ways to do that. And giving our kids kind of some creativity and freedom to do that, I think is important.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that because you're giving them like the basic principles, but also giving them some freedom as well. And
Hmm.
sometimes, like you say, they are going to start copying you by because of your example. Like with my kids, they actually started doing a few things I do in the morning just because they found out I do them. They started doing them as well. But it's good
Yep.
for them to, yeah, for them to feel like it doesn't have to be at that time or it doesn't have to be in that location. It can be somewhere else, like you mentioned, that there's flexibility, that there's freedom. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, it's really good. And but teaching them this two-way conversation thing, yeah, it's really good. Yeah. And so finally, where can people find you in your writing?
Um, you can go find everything that I've written, along with everything my husband has written. Actually, we just
Hmm.
created a new website called
Okay.
jimmyandkelly.com. We host a podcast together now, and so we've moved all our resources there. So you
Mm,
can search there and find articles, all the hundreds of articles I've written over the years, but also I've written two books that you can find. Um, on Amazon, or if you do Kindle. I know this is a podcast going to many different places in the world, but those things are available in most people's online bookstores. So
mm.
you can find me there as well.
Ah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to look up this new podcast and also the website. I'm really
Yeah.
interested because I read some articles on your other website and I really enjoyed them. So yeah, I highly recommend Kelly's articles and content. It's really good. And yeah,
Mhm.
so thank you so much for coming on today. It was really lovely to hear about this topic and your take on it and your experience. It was really good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna.